The winter of 1944 was crueler than most. Snow blanketed the Ardennes in thick sheets, muffling the thunder of distant artillery but never silencing it. For the German Red Cross nurses stationed in makeshift field hospitals, the days and nights blurred into one endless procession of wounds, blood, and whispered last breaths. Anna Muller had served since 1940, her hands skilled in stitching torn flesh, her voice practiced in speaking comfort to men who would not live to see the dawn. She and her companions, Lotta, who was barely 20, and Ingrid, stern and practical, worked in the cold glow of lanterns, their uniforms stained dark with blood that could not be scrubbed out. When the American counter-offensive rolled through, their hospital, no more than a wooden barn patched with canvas, was overrun. Soldiers shouted, rifles leveled. The wounded moaned in fear. Anna braced herself for what she thought would come. Contempt, jeers, perhaps worse. She had heard the stories, spread like wildfire through whispers. Americans would treat them as traitors, as collaborators in cruelty. The nurses were ordered outside, their hands raised. Snowflakes clung to their lashes, their breath forming pale clouds in the freezing air. Lotta whispered prayers through chattering teeth. Ingrid stood stiff, her chin raised, as though defiance could shield her from humiliation. Anna felt only weariness, the bone-deep exhaustion of years spent in service to a cause she no longer believed in, but could not escape. They were marched to a camp hastily established beyond the forest. Barbed wire gleamed beneath the winter sun. Inside, rows of American prisoners of war shuffled in threadbare coats, their eyes hollow from months of captivity. The nurses froze at the sight. These were men who had bled under German fire, who had starved in German cages. Surely their hatred would be merciless. The guards push it, with the women toward a separate enclosure, but not far from the Americans. Hours dragged by. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. Their hands remained bound, their dignity frayed. Anna stared at the prisoners across the yard, waiting for the insults, the curses. She imagined stones hurled, spittle, mocking laughter. But none came. Instead, one of the Americans, a tall soldier with sunken cheeks and eyes too old for his youth, lifted his gaze. He studied them for a moment, then raised his hand in a faint wave. His lips formed a word, slow and deliberate, meant to cross the language barrier. Sisters. Anna blinked, certain she had misheard. But then another repeated it, louder this time, voice hoarse but clear. Sisters. The word spread among the group, whispered, echoed. Sisters. Not enemies, not monsters. Sisters. The women stood stunned, unable to comprehend. Lotta burst into tears, her sobs muffled by frozen hands. Ingrid shook her head, whispering, "It is a trick. It must be." But Anna felt something shift inside her, something she had not felt in years, the faintest flicker of grace. That night, huddled in their barracks, the nurses whispered about the moment. "Why would they call us that?" Lotta asked, wiping her red eyes. "They should hate us." Anna had no answer. She only replayed the sound in her mind, the foreign word that carried no hatred. Sisters. The following days deepened the strangeness. When the nurses were escorted to help in the infirmary, they found themselves tending not to German wounded, but to Americans. Their captors placed bandages in their hands, pointed to fevered brows, and ordered them to work. Anna's hands trembled as she pressed a cloth to a soldier's wound. The man winced, then whispered weakly in English. She did not understand the words, but his tone was gentle, not bitter. He reached for her wrist briefly, his lips forming the word again. "A sister." Something inside her broke. She had expected contempt, rage, even violence, but instead, the men she had been taught to fear and despise looked at her as something entirely different, as kin in suffering, as women bound to the same war's cruelty. That night, Anna scribbled in her hidden diary, using the stub of a pencil smuggled into her pocket. We thought capture meant humiliation. Instead, they named us sisters. I do not know if I deserve the word, but it felt like water on parched lips. The snow fell heavier in the days that followed, blanketing the camp in silence. Yet within that silence, the word lingered, spoken softly across the wire, whispered by prisoners who had no reason to show kindness. The nurses carried it like a fragile flame against the cold. For the first time since the war had begun, Anna began to wonder if the walls built by propaganda could be broken, not by speeches or battles, but by a single word offered in mercy. Snow clung to the barbed wire like frost-laced lace, glinting beneath the weak winter sun. Days stretched into one another, and the nurses settled uneasily into their captivity. They remained watched, guarded, their movements monitored at every turn. Yet each morning they were escorted into the camp infirmary, where the strange rhythm of mercy continued. Anna found herself tending to American prisoners more often than Germans. Their wounds told stories no words could: deep gashes from shrapnel, frostbite gnawing away at toes, fevers raging through thin bodies weakened by starvation. She washed brows, changed bandages, pressed cups of water to cracked lips. And again, she heard it, the word that had first stunned her. Sister. The way the Americans said it varied. Some whispered it in thanks, their voices trembling with fever. Others spoke it as reassurance, as though the word itself was a bridge across the gulf of war. One soldier clasped her hand as she replaced his dressing, his grip weak but steady. "Danke, sister," he rasped in halting German. Lotta struggled with it most. Her hands shook as she worked, her eyes never meeting those of the prisoners. "How can they call us that?" she whispered one night in the barracks, her voice heavy with guilt. "We were part of the machine that caged them, that starved them. I wore this uniform proudly once. Now it feels like a stain." Ingrid, ever stern, tried to dismiss the word. "It is just desperation. They call us sisters because they need us to care for them." But even her voice wavered. The word carried weight, too sincere to be dismissed as mere survival. Anna kept silent. Yet in the quiet hours after lights out, she traced the letters in her mind, writing them on an invisible page. Sister. She could not explain why it mattered, only that it felt like a balm laid over years of bitterness. One evening, as they scrubbed linens in icy water, an American chaplain entered. Through the interpreter he spoke simply. "They call you sisters because you care for them as family. In suffering, kinship grows." The nurses exchanged uneasy glances. Family. The word cut deep. Anna thought of her own children, sent to relatives in Dresden before the bombings began. Were they alive? Did they still remember her face? If American prisoners could call her sister, could her own children still call her mother? The chaplain invited them to Mass once again. This time they accepted without hesitation. The chapel was crowded, filled with soldiers and prisoners alike. Candles flickered, shadows danced across weary faces. The hymn rose, solemn and fragile. Anna closed her eyes. For a moment she could almost believe she was back in her village church, long before uniforms, long before battlefields. Lotta wept openly, her voice rising with the hymn as though trying to reclaim a part of herself that war had stolen. Even Ingrid, stiff and reluctant, mouthed the words. After the service, as the women filed out, one American POW leaned forward, his bout tattooed, face gaunt but his eyes steady. "Schwester," he said in German. The word carried the same meaning, sister. Anna bowed her head, unable to speak. The following weeks deepened the bond. The nurses learned fragments of English, water, pain, bandage, while the Americans practiced broken German phrases of thanks. In the infirmary, Anna overheard an American telling another, "They patch us up like kin." The other replied simply, "Sisters," yet guilt haunted them still. One night, Greta, another nurse transferred into their barracks, confessed through tears that she had once escorted prisoners to trains bound east. "How can I now be called sister?" she whispered, trembling. Anna placed a hand on her shoulder. "Perhaps this is forgiveness, not of our deeds, but of our humanity." Ingrid scoffed, but even she clutched her thin blanket tighter that night, her lips moving silently in prayer. When spring thawed the snow, the camp transformed. Mud replaced ice, and news filtered through. Germany was crumbling. Surrender loomed. The women felt fear twist in their stomachs. What would happen when the Reich collapsed completely? Would they still be seen as sisters, or condemned as servants of a fallen regime? One afternoon, Anna was tending to a prisoner with a festering wound. His fever made him delirious. He grasped her wrist suddenly, whispering in English. She caught only one word clearly. "Home." Tears blurred her vision. She understood. He longed for home just as she did. Slowly she nodded, pressing the cloth against his brow. "Ja," she whispered. "Home." That night, she wrote in her diary, "The war has stolen homes from us all. Yet here, in this place, among enemies, I am called sister. Perhaps that is a kind of home I never expected." The women carried the word with them, unsure if it was gift or burden. Each time they heard it, they felt both comfort and shame. Yet they could not deny its power. It was reshaping them, softening edges carved by years of propaganda. By April, the camp buzzed with rumors of surrender. Guards whispered, prisoners speculated, the chaplain preached of peace. The nurses, still bound by barbed wire but freer in spirit, waited for the future to reveal what the word sister truly meant. By May 1945, the camp lived in a state of waiting. Rumors arrived faster than rations. Berlin fallen, Hitler dead, the Reich gone. The nurses huddled together at night, whispering the same question over and over. What would become of them now? Anna noticed the change in the guards first. Their patrols grew lazier, their voices lighter, as if the burden of endless war had finally lifted. The prisoners, too, seemed to sense something. They stood straighter, their eyes sharper, their conversations less filled with despair. Liberation was coming. One morning, an American officer entered the barracks with the interpreter at his side. His words were brief. "The war is over. You will be processed, then released." The nurses sat in stunned silence. Released. The word felt unreal, fragile, like a dream spoken too loudly might vanish. Lotta clasped Anna's hand so tightly her nails dug into skin. Ingrid whispered, "Released? To what? There is nothing left of Germany." But freedom, even uncertain, was more than they had dared hope. Their final days in the camp were marked by an odd quiet. They continued their work in the infirmary, tending wounds and washing fevers. Yet everything felt different now, as though time itself was holding its breath. On their last evening, the chaplain gathered them in the chapel. Candles flickered against the wooden beams, casting shadows that seemed softer than before. He spoke through the interpreter. "You came here as enemies. You leave as women who served in suffering. Remember what was shared here." Then, as if to seal his words, the prisoners began a hymn. Their voices, hoarse but strong, carried the melody of amazing grace. The nurses stood at the back, listening, trembling. When the chorus swelled, Anna found her own lips moving, not with words she knew, but with the rhythm of hope. As the hymn faded, one prisoner stepped forward. He was gaunt, his cheeks hollow, but his eyes burned with conviction. He raised his hand toward the women and said in halting German, "Schwestern." Sisters. The word echoed in the small chapel. The other prisoners repeated it, soft at first, then stronger. Sisters. Tears blurred Anna's vision. For months she had carried that word like a fragile ember. Now, as it filled the room, it felt like a flame, warm enough to pierce the coldest night. She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking. When the women left the camp, they carried little, threadbare coats, worn shoes, scraps of letters. But each carried something more enduring, the memory of enemies who had called them kin. Anna would later write in her diary, "We were captured as servants of a broken cause. We expected hatred, perhaps death. Instead, they named us sisters. The word was more than kindness. It was a forgiveness I did not deserve, but which I will carry all my life." Years later, when her grandchildren asked about the war, Anna did not speak of uniforms or battlefields. She spoke of the snow, the infirmary, the taste of fear. And then she spoke of the word that had changed everything. "In captivity," she told them softly, "the men we were taught to despise called us sisters. That is the memory I kept when all others turned to ash." Lotta, too, carried the word. In her old age, she admitted to her daughter, "I learned that mercy can be harder to bear than cruelty, but mercy also heals, even when we think we are beyond healing." Even Ingrid, who had once scoffed at the idea, admitted before her death, "The Americans gave us no medals, no praise, only a word, and sometimes a word is the heaviest gift of all." The diaries of those women, tucked away in archives and family trunks, rarely appear in history books. Battles claim the headlines, generals the monuments. But their fragments remain. Chocolate wrappers pressed flat, scraps of paper filled with trembling handwriting, and the single word repeated again and again, sister. Perhaps that is the true legacy of their captivity, not statistics of prisoners held or rations consumed, but the fragile truth that even in war's darkest corners, enemies could look into one another's eyes and see something more.